I'm making a game about ant people. They swarm like ants, they live like people. Unfortunately, this means I have to simulate both. In the last video, I added roguelike inspired random elements to the game to make it more unpredictable and replayable. And from the screenshots that players have sent me, it seems to be working. Different buildings produce very different kingdoms. The balancing of the last demo was a bit crap. Lots of players were pretty much going infinite, and we can't have that, can we? On my honour as a game developer, I have to bring more pain to my players. So I scrapped the entire combat system and I started all over again. The goal is to make something that's challenging, but in a fair way that's still beatable. And so I played a bunch of video games, which does count as research, don't judge me. And in particular, I was drawn towards tower defense games. My game does already have a lot of tower defense DNA. And then I realised the mistake I've been making. Up until now, the combat has been inspired by Pikmin. You can pick up your ants and move them around to dodge attacks. And this is micro-strategy. But what I want is for the player to be thinking more about the big picture. And the secret is to make the enemies really simple. Ideally, every enemy does just one thing, and then they attack in big swarms. This lets the player design and build the correct defences needed to counter them. I started with this Beetle concept, a simpler silhouette with fewer colours, which makes the graphics a lot easier to read in a swarm. Then I lobotomized them. A creature's brain is now just a simple stack of behaviours, with the higher behaviours taking priority over the lower ones. To start, I just made the beetles travel towards your castle. This is their whole plan. Then I set up this test room where I can spawn as many beetles as I please. Next I gave them a second behaviour. They kamikaze into your buildings. I also gave them a simple run animation. It's only 2 frames, but honestly, that is enough. At this point, I thought they'd look better with yellow eyes. Makes them more handsome, helps them read more clearly at small scales. What do you think? Is this better or worse? Now let's start thinking about the ants. Previously, your ants would just headbutt the poor creatures to death. It's efficient, but it has a major balancing issue, which is that once you've stockpiled enough ants, you would basically become invincible. You could just nuke anything that gets anywhere near you. So I needed a different approach, and I came up with this. Now your ants will also kamikaze into the enemies. So fighting now has a cost. Eventually your colony can be overwhelmed by constant fighting. In other words, your ants are now your bullets. Grow ants and slam them into your enemies, just like nature intended. Of course, your ants are your economy too, so this creates a natural counterbalance. There are lots of different ways that you can increase your ant population, but now there's also a force pushing it back down. And this will encourage the player to create a proper line of defences, but we're going to come back around to that later. So the game already has a stag beetle enemy, but the design is a bit goofy and a bit overcomplicated, so I've revamped its design to match the other beetle, only bigger and meaner. The Discord community decided that this was actually a rhino beetle, not a stag beetle, and I'm no beetleologist, so I'm going to trust them. I've given these big guys some slightly more complex behaviour. They still travel towards your castle, but now if they get near another building, they'll get distracted. They also have a charge attack, and unfortunately, they're allowed to use it more than once. So in groups, they can be quite dangerous. They have a lot more health too, so they're kind of like an anti-ant tank. You'll need a lot of self-sacrificing soldiers to bring it down, which makes it even more important that you invest in proper defenses. On the flip side, I decided to make them leave a corpse when they die. The corpse is worth food, which means it's worth ants. And I've redone all the animations to make this nice and snappy. Previously, all of the enemies would drop corpses, but this would clutter the screen and just make a lot of busy work for your ants, so now only the bigger enemies are going to drop a corpse, and to compensate, that corpse is now worth a lot more than it was. Now let's talk about the crickets. I am quite fond of this old design, but unfortunately, it's just rather too detailed. So, I've reworked it into the new style, consistent with the Beetles. They have the same basic strategy, kamikaze, but I've also given them the power to jump. So as they move across the level, they will jump from tile to tile. And of course this meant that we needed a short jumping animation. Then I gave it another behaviour, leapfrog, which allows it to jump over your buildings. And this does matter because it lets the crickets more easily target your castle. However, they can only jump over one building, so if your buildings go 2 layers deep, then they will land on the back one. Next, I drew a bigger cricket. This one is basically a locust, and I animated it just like the smaller variant. These big ones can attack your buildings multiple times in a row, just like the rhino beetles. And I made it leave a corpse too. This was not originally the plan, but seeing them together like this, I figured I should probably make a big and small variant for all of the creatures. So I did exactly that. This creature, as you can probably tell, is a fly, and as a fly, I made it able to fly. It rises up and it moves around erratically, just like the real thing. However, I found it was hard to tell how high up the flies actually were, so I added this special shadow sprite to its graphics, and I repositioned this sprite onto the floor on every frame. So now they have a lot more 3D presence, which helps sell the illusion of flying. Now, since they attack in large numbers and they can also fly over your defensive walls, I made them very easy to defeat. They're all about quantity over quality, just like the Soviets. Then for the bigger flies, I gave them the same repeating attack as the large cricket, but with a modified flying animation. However, I wasn't quite happy with this. It just made them too similar. But then someone in the Discord community posted this idea. What if the large flies could lay eggs inside your buildings to spawn additional flies? What a horrible idea. But I liked it because it ties the big flies into this same swarming theme, although the programming was a little bit more complex. I started by making the fly fly in, fill it with eggs, and fly off. I also had to make each building usable only once, so that they will actually leave when they're done. Then I started spawning the small flies. Naturally, they immediately kamikazed into their spawn building, so I had to make them target the castle instead. And I made the big flies leave a body behind as well. So now we've got 3 pairs of creatures, each with a distinct gameplay role. In retrospect, should I have given so many of them the power to jump or fly over your defenses? No. But I'll add more creature types in the future. I know that the bird enemies from previous videos are a fan favourite, but they'd need a complete revamp for the new gameplay, so I'm not bringing them back just now. But if we can reach 20,000 wishlists, then I will. Now let's think about the towers. We already have this archery turret from a previous demo, and it can shoot rapid fire arrows at all creatures within range. But it uses leaves as ammunition, so you've got to keep it stocked up with leaves. Right now, the game has 4 different resource types: food, leaves, clay, and sugar. Food gives you ants, and so I designed a new turret for clay and another for sugar. The clay turret is a cannon. It has a low rate of fire but does high damage. Whereas the sugar turret creates a puddle of honey which slows creatures down and deals damage to them over time. The arrows are particularly good against flies, but they're terrible against the rhino beetles. But cannons have the opposite problem. They're very good at defeating high health targets, like the rhino beetles, but they struggle against large swarms. And honey is great against crickets because it stops them from jumping. But it does absolutely nothing to flies, because flies have discovered the concept of going over things. So now each turret has its role, but for that to work, you need to have a heads up before a squadron of kamikaze pilots heads your way. So I designed a different warning icon for each creature type, and whenever a new battle path activates, it gets assigned a primary type. The other creatures can still attack from this direction, but the previewed ones will be the majority. And this is how you can place your turrets in more tactical positions. But I still needed a way to control the difficulty, so I made a battle wave calculator. This button makes the game harder. To begin with, it just adds more small creatures, but there's a random chance that these small creatures will be compacted into big creatures instead. And eventually we start mixing in different creature types as well. And because we're choosing these effects randomly, we end up with every wave looking somewhat different. But there's still a problem. Keep on scaling up the difficulty and the number of creatures just starts to get a bit silly. It would be a lot better to make each creature stronger as well as just more numerous. So I cooked up these 2 palette swaps. The green creatures are twice as strong and the blue creatures are actually 4 times as strong as the red ones. Maybe in the future we could expand this to a whole rainbow of difficulty tiers, but for this month, 3 is enough. I set up these palette swaps for all of the creatures, which took a bit of time, but it's worth it. So now we can make the waves stronger without having to make them enormous. And hopefully that keeps things under control. Now let's take a look at everything in action. I've uploaded all of these changes to the Steam demo, which is still available for free. My thanks go out to anyone who plays it, gives feedback, leaves a wishlist, or any of that stuff. And I'll see you next time.